Never mind.
Live.
Jen, we're live.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Okay, hi, welcome everybody to the Sustainability Commission meeting on March 20th. We're gonna start with I'll read the script.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. Just a quick housekeeping note before we begin. For the members of the public who are joining the meeting via the computer, device, or phone, please be advised that your microphone is automatically muted when you enter the meeting. Commissioners, as a panelist, you are able to mute or unmute your video and mic at your discretion. So please mute yourself when you are not speaking to avoid any background noise. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speakers queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, click on the blue hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. We will lower hands as speakers are called upon. When the public comment begins, we will announce your name and unmute your microphone. We will have 2 minutes to speak. You will have 2 minutes to speak, after which your microphone will again be muted. Regarding the chat and Q&A function in Zoom, please note that attendees cannot use these features, and commissioners, we ask that you do not utilize the chat function for any other purpose than technological assistance, as attendees cannot access these conversations. And in accordance with passage of HB 4212, this meeting will be recorded and posted to the Sustainability Commission website. Please contact the Sustainability Commission if there's testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different format. And with that, I turn the meeting over to Chair Bowman.
Thank you, Danielle. And we have a couple of commissioners with us online today. Excuse me, Laura Allen and Lily Yao, correct? Is that it? And as far as we know, do we have anybody, members of the public in attendance online?
There's one thing.
Who's there?
Rose McGinnis.
Great. So first action item is to review and approve the agenda in the February minutes. Anybody have any changes to the February minutes? No? Anybody like to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve the February minutes.
Thank you very much.
Seconded.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. All in favor of approving minutes? We're good. Okay. And that's great. So the next item is the land acknowledgement. And this month Laura provided the information about the land acknowledgement. Laura, do you have some things you'd like to say about it?
There's a powwow, and the link is in there, and it's a great way to learn about the local Indigenous community, as well as people come from all over. So it's open to the public, and it's coming up next month.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, those are very cool. It's been a while since I've been to one. It's very neat. Next month, Karen Kaplan is up for this honor, and so hopefully she's not attending the meeting tonight, so we'll remind her. Next item is public comment and commissioner response. Do we have anybody wanting to speak from the public? No.
There are no interest.
No one.
Although we did get a message, this is the time when we share messages. The message was from Art Farley. He's a previous sustainability commissioner, and he shared that Portland recently passed a ban on gas leaf blowers. He shared a news article, and I'd keep trying.
Thank you, Art.
It's not an immediate ban, FYI, in
Is that
case
right?
others have not seen it.
No.
It's not like as of tomorrow, it's phased in over time.
Interesting. We should look up some articles. Read a little bit more.
You can find out tons about it on the Quiet Clean PDX website, where you can find all kinds of things about gas powered leaf blowers, but they have a huge section on it because they're so excited that because they push so hard for it.
It's great. Well, I think with that, we're ready to move to our first presentation item about the Recycling Modernization Act. Do we have Deborah Musgrave here to tell us all about it?
Just a quick process. Did we just jump over approve agenda and minutes?
Well, we approved the minutes. I guess I didn't separately approve the agenda.
Okay.
Sorry. Do we have
No, we're
any?
good. I'm good.
Anybody?
I'm on board with both.
Okay. Good point, though. I should do those separately.
Well, sorry, I didn't know.
Where are they? Oh.
Yeah, just sit down. Great.
Thank you, commissioners, for having me here today. I'll give you a brief overview of what we know so far about Oregon's Recycling Modernization Act and its impacts and how it will be implemented here in Eugene. And I kind of want to preface this by saying that the act is still in rulemaking right now, and we've been following that pretty closely.
Speak up a little bit.
Sure. So the act is in rulemaking right now. And so we know some things, but we don't know everything. There's some things that have yet to be finalized, but we're getting there. So I'll go ahead and just start sharing. Oh, it is. Yeah, sorry, new tech for me. So the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, everyone's referring to it as the Recycling Modernization Act or the RMA. So I'll probably be using that term during our presentation here. So this act is going to update our really outdated Oregon recycling systems. It's going to build on our local programs, which are already pretty robust in Oregon. But essentially what it's going to do is it's going to leverage the producers of packaging and their resources to make sure that we have what we need to modernize Oregon's system. So they're going to be paying into this whole system so that we have the resources to really make some forward progress on what recycling looks like in Oregon. So the law became effective on January 1st in 2022, but it won't be fully implemented until July 1st of 2025. So the point of this law is not just to make recycling easier for the public to use, it's going to expand access to recycling services across the state really substantially. Our rural areas in Oregon are extremely underserved, and for a very long time, Oregon's recycling systems have been limited by access to markets. It's been a market-driven system. So if you weren't close enough to a market, you couldn't recycle the material that was generated in your community. And this law is going to change that by making sure that people in rural areas have the same access to recycling and all of the expanded list that it's going to come along with that people in more urban areas do. It's also going to invest in the material recovery facilities and the processing ability that folks have to actually take in and sort recycling. So for a very long time, recycling has been sorted sort of on a shape basis in Oregon, and it wasn't necessarily linked to what kind of resin plastic was made out of or what kind of material necessarily an item was made out of. It was more, what could a material recovery facility actually sort into categories? And so a lot of this is being done by hand. This is going to change all that. This investment from producer responsibility organizations is going to provide the money that's necessary to find technological solutions for sorting our recycling and sort of bring it into our modern era. That's going to really expand what we're able to process. It's also, in addition to the environmental components of this, it's going to reduce plastic pollution. Plastic has been really one of the most significant categories of recycling that has been difficult to process in Oregon. So here's kind of just a slide of how it will work. And as you can see, this is from Oregon DEQ. So the producers of these covered products under the RMA are going to form and actually have formed producer responsibility organizations. At this point, there's one producer responsibility organization, and they're in the process of putting together their plan, which they will submit to DEQ for review. It'll probably be subject to revision, and hopefully by February of 2025, we'll know exactly what the plan looks like. The other feature of this plan is it's going to create a unified state collection list. So everyone in Oregon will be recycling the same things. The list of items that are able to be recycled in anyone's community are going to look the same, whether you live in Roseburg or Eugene or the Portland metro area. It's going to significantly expand recycling services and our access to those, both locally here in Eugene and across the state. It's going to pay into additional education and contamination reduction, education and strategies. And it's also, like I mentioned before, going to invest in the material processing end of this so that we're able to actually collect clean material and process it more effectively and efficiently. And lastly, it's going to ensure that these materials are, they end up in responsible end markets. So instead of just being shipped overseas in bundles and we don't know what happens to them after that point, all of the end markets for the materials that are covered, the products under the RMA, will go to responsible end markets, and that will be something that there's audits for. So we'll know what's actually happening to our materials from processing and all the way through the end market. So as I mentioned before, it's being paid into by producers and manufacturers of packaged items. So it's paper products, food serviceware, et cetera. And it's this investment that's going to pay for these necessary improvements. The hope is that this is going to make things not only easier for Oregonians, but more effective. So these producer responsibility organizations will implement and fund these required actions under the RMA. And so what that essentially means is that the producer responsibility organizations will be responsible for implementing certain required elements of the law. They will also be responsible for reimbursing local governments and service providers for implementing other parts of the law. And this is intended to build on existing programs. So it won't supersede anything that's already happening. It will be layered on top of that. So we'll have more robust education, contamination reduction education, and so on. So examples of eligible costs. Essentially, our haulers are going to be looking at an expanded list. Here in Eugene, we have relatively limited access to markets right now. So even though we have a pretty robust recycling program here in Eugene, we are limited in what we can collect. But when the Unified State Collection List, which is significantly larger than our current recycling program, is implemented, haulers may need larger carts, they may need more frequent collection routes. We're going to be obviously creating educational and promotional literature for individuals. There's going to be a need for recycling reload facilities and investment in those. So the materials can reload facilities. So materials can be aggregated and then taken to material recovery facilities, mostly just because the volume is going to probably increase substantially, at least in certain areas like Eugene and especially in rural locations. There's also depots. So depot collection, and that's going to be a new thing for Eugene. So producer responsibility organizations, in addition to the Unified State Collection List, which will be collected curbside, will be they will be establishing depots to collect materials that are not suitable for curbside collection, such as styrofoam, certain types of pressurized cylinders. There's a variety of things on the list that individuals will have an opportunity to take to a depot, even if they can't put it in their curbside cart. So the establishment and the contracting of those depots is on the producer responsibility organizations, as well as the siting, and then the aggregation of those materials. And then again, those will have to go to a responsible end market. So what does responsible end market mean? and how much material is actually going to successfully be recycled under the act. Now, recycling isn't 100% type process. And so I think the target right now, as far as I understand it, is that 60% of any given material that's processed through the system will end up being recycled, because of course, there's still going to be damage, contamination, and items that, you know, may not belong in there, might be the wrong resin type, et cetera. So in order to be considered responsible, the end markets are going to need to stay compliant with a variety of environmental and labor and public health laws. There's an expectation that there's going to be living wage paid to individuals that work in material recovery facilities. And the recovery facilities, as well as the end markets, are going to be subject to public health laws and also subject to auditing. So that we'll be certain that this currently relatively unregulated industry on the processing and markets end now has some scrutiny over it, and we know what's really happening. So here's a sneak peek. This is not really the list because it's changed a couple of times in the rulemaking process, but I think we're getting close, and this is probably pretty similar to what it's actually going to look like. Although the clear plastic cups there on the bottom, I believe those are not currently included. As well as, no, I think there's no, for a minute there, we were talking about like the Pringles containers, the paper and metal cans, and those have also been taken off the list. So there's been some pretty robust debate between public sector and obviously Aura and some of the trade groups that represent, you know, the recyclers and the material processors, as well as the trade groups that are paying into this and are part of the pros. So if anyone's interested in more information about what the list looks like right now, or at least what the proposed list looks like, I know this is kind of a lot to put on a slide. Let me know and I'm happy to share that.
Yeah, I looked at the, draft list that was sent to us earlier. And what I noticed, there's very limited glass on the list.
That's
And
a
glass, my understanding, was economically the most readily market-driven product or higher end.
It turns out, based on DEQ's studies and some of the industry studies that have happened during this, that glass is sort of a break even when it comes to recyclability versus the environmental costs of collection. So DEQ's position on this has been that glass should be collected at pro depots instead of curbside. However, and I was going to get to this in a slide here in a second.
We already had the answer, wait, we can get to it.
We are going to collect glass curbside in Eugene. We have the latitude to do that. And I'll talk a little bit more about why we're making that decision.
Okay.
So here's the pro acceptance list. So this is different than the list we just looked at. That's the curbside list, or at least the proposed curbside list. So this is what we're going to be seeing, people having access to collecting at the depots. That will mean that these depots need to be sited near public transportation. They need to have convenience standards such as certain operating hours, hours of business, to make it so that people have an opportunity to really use these depots in the way that they were intended. As you can see, there's lots of things on here that are currently not recyclable curbside in Eugene. So this will also, I think, be kind of an improvement to our current system. There's things like plastic buckets that just are too big to fit in bins and wouldn't be suitable for curbside collection, but we'll now have an opportunity to collect those. I think one of the big changes with the pro depots for us is going to be the aluminum foil, which will now be a depot collection item. But the glass packaging, because of the fact that it's bulky, potentially dangerous, and very difficult for people that do not have access to transportation or may have mobility issues to take to a depot, we've made the decision to continue glass packaging collection curbside in Eugene until such time as perhaps wine bottles and some of the things that we see in that stream end up becoming a covered product by the Oregon bottle bill. So if those become part of OBRC's purview, we may change that. Yeah, we just covered this slide.
Were number one clamshells, were they in there anywhere?
Let's take a look. I don't believe that they are on the curbside list. There's been a lot of discussion about thermoform packaging, and there's pros and cons on each side of it, but I believe that what DEQ finally decided was that there were processing and collection issues with it, and then the recyclability didn't support doing that. But it has been discussed multiple times. So I'm not 100% clear. I've concluded at this point. Luckily, we'll have some finality to the list at some point soon. It's obviously a challenge to start talking to the public about this and educating our residents when we don't actually know quite yet exactly what's going to be on the list. Yes.
Yeah, so similar question of like, you were saying of plastic cups then, as far as you know, are not on the list now, the clear plastic cups. And it says no other plastic foodware, serviceware. It seems like those are pretty big items that are not being included in terms of volume.
Yeah, and this, a lot of these decisions have been made after very long processes of consulting pretty much everyone in the industry, including the public sector, because obviously we're very invested in getting as much material collected as we possibly can. But there are other limiting factors in what is actually recyclable, and I think that's sort of the bigger picture here is, you know, recycling is not necessarily the solution. Sometimes it's a consumption issue or a packaging issue. And I think part of what's important about this law is that there are some provisions in it that will create incentives for packaging producers to produce packaging that is recyclable and is more recyclable or more easily recyclable. So there should be some pressure on manufacturers to make some more responsible choices, because it will impact how much investment in the system they have to provide financially. So there is that component, and we're hoping to see, you know, some benefit from that more thoughtful piece of the law.
That would be better, yeah.
So I just really like this slide, so I threw it in here in case it's of interest, because I do think that recycling is really important. It's important for us to talk about. I'm incredibly excited about the RMA, as I think are most people in the industry and residents across the state of Oregon, but we're still looking at a lot of food and other organics in our landfill when you look at the composition study. So that's just kind of something to think about moving forward, is that this is a great step forward for the state when it comes to recycling, but we still need to think and talk about how to address organics.
I added up about 9% of all kinds of plastics.
Yeah. Yeah, now a portion of those that end up in the landfill will now be recyclable under the RMA. So hopefully we'll see when we do future landfill composition studies that that slice gets a little smaller.
Can you tell me a little bit either how they're treated or what the implications are for compostable plastics like cups and flatware? The stuff is ostensibly compostable, but usually only in, you know, industrial facilities that hit pretty high heat and often not curbside, like in the yard waste bin with food compost goes, right? So is that covered? Is that considered plastic?
No, actually, it's a short answer.
They're not.
Compostable plastics are not plastic,
Right.
technically, but unfortunately, they're too much like a plastic to really actually be effectively composted in commercial
Right.
composting facilities, which is why many, if not most, of the West Coast industrial composting facilities have banned those from composting programs. There's a variety of issues with putting compostable products in an organic stream. But one of them is, especially with the plastics, is that they just don't break down efficiently, and they do not contribute anything to the health of the compost or the soil that it's an additive in. So those are not covered products. Really, I think Oregon DEQ has done a lot of material studies on this. I'm just gonna stop share. And I think the prevailing wisdom from them is that a lot of these compostable products may have actually in some cases, a larger carbon footprint than disposable single-use products. And so we're really trying to move away from those. It's interesting though, because of course, California sort of enshrined compostable serviceware in their kind of composting state law. So it'll be interesting to see kind of that push and pull since there are neighbor. So that was kind of, I think, an interesting choice is what it's an Oregon thing. But yeah, great question. Thank you.
So that jogs another question I was having earlier too, that, so this is a consistency effort across the state of Oregon, which is fantastic and a big step. But how does it compare? How does what we're doing compare to what other states have done or are doing? In the same way that you say, there are different places in Oregon, you know, I can recycle this here, but I can't recycle it there. It's true in different parts of the country as well. So Are other states moving in this direction? Are we ahead? Are we behind?
We're ahead, which is great because that makes Oregon, a leader in this. Maine is not close behind. Maine is also in the process of rulemaking for an extended producer responsibility packaging law. I think that the difficulty with being first is we're going to learn a lot, and states that come after us will benefit from that. So it may be more of a growth process for Oregon, but we will be leading on this. And it's been, there's a lot of interest in how this is being implemented, especially in Washington state, because they've tried to get EPR across the finish line legislatively several times now. And I think they're really kind of pushing that. So they're watching what we're doing with great interest.
Good question. A couple questions. I'll try to be quick. So when you said there's one PRO currently, is that everywhere or is that Oregon?
That's Oregon.
That's Oregon.
Yeah,
okay.
there were two initially and one of them dropped out. The one that is currently, well, the one that will be our pro, they are, it's made up of individuals that have worked in pro space in Canada and in other countries where this is not uncommon. So they're bringing a certain amount of experience to this, and I think that's probably why they were the successful entity. There was some uncertainty about whether or not there would be one pro or multiple pros initially, and we ended up with two, and then now we have one. So it actually does simplify things to a degree, because now all of the actions that DEQ is going to assign the pro will be assigned to one organization, which I think streamlines things.
So would there be an advantage or disadvantage to having more than one? So this is a pro is something that DEQ is going to contract with them?
No, the pros are essentially a group that the packaging producers have to create and pay into. So they will administer some of the requirements of the law that are the requirements of the packaging producers on behalf of them. Similar, in a sense, to how OBRC functions for bottle packaging producers.
So the second part of my question kind of was, so what incentive do producers, so these producers are mostly out of state, right? I mean,
Some are, I mean, because obviously big packaging producers, some of them are definitely not here in Oregon.
so, I mean, is our market powerful enough? I mean, we're not California to like for anyone to care. I mean, I know that sounds a little bit snide, but you know what I mean? Like, are we just gonna have a bunch of packaging? Not that that would necessarily be bad, but people just pull out of the Oregon market, and then will that limit the amount of funding we have for implementing all the other stuff on the other end that the money that comes through the pros, right, is supposed to pay for?
Yeah, I don't think that anyone is currently believing that that will happen, mostly because I mean, General Mills is not just gonna pull cereal off the shelves in Oregon. you know?
Right.
So I think the prevailing thought process is that no, it won't have like negative impacts for either consumers or for this law and how it's implemented and how it's paid into. There's also a lot of hope that as California and Washington start moving forward on EPR, that we're gonna be this big block of states that even if we're not in complete agreement with how it's implemented, essentially create more market pressure. And, at a certain point, it'll be kind of critical mass, especially because Maine and also Colorado are working on this. I believe Colorado is a little further behind, if I'm recalling correctly, but as more and more states start doing this, I think the pressure will be on, and we may start seeing changes at the packaging level that actually are national, even though it's just a handful of large states that have implemented this.
And then why is their aluminum not gonna be picked up at the curbside anymore?
So the Recycling Advisory Council, a lot of this was unpacked during that process, and there were recommendations made by that council as to what should be collected curbside versus what should be collected in the pro depots. And so I think that it probably was a concern about how suitable it was for curbside collection. And that's pretty much all I know about why aluminum was excluded. The glass one, I've thought quite a bit more about, just because I think it has more impacts for residents.
Aluminum foil, the oldie but a goodie.
I would imagine there's a significant contamination risk for aluminum foil.
Yeah, and if
It's
there,
a pain to wash it. I know that at my house.
and if there's interest, a lot of the rulemaking and all of the recycling advisory committee meeting notes and all of the technical advisory committee information is all available on DEQ's website. So if you want to do a really deep dive, it's all there and you can wade through lots of.
There's so much.
Chris had his hand up.
Hopefully this isn't too intense. So, just curious, I mean, everybody here probably knows that Sweden is kind of ridiculous on how well they recycle things. You familiar with some of what their percentages are there at all?
I'm more familiar with Japan's, but yeah, generally speaking.
It's probably similar. And then it's, when you're talking about aluminum, like Sweden recycles like 82% of its aluminum and 86% of its glass. What do you see as like what's keeping us more like countries that are in the 80s and 90% for recycling?
It probably has as much to do with our political structure and the way that our economy works. Big business has quite a bit of influence in the US, and I would say that's probably a lot of it. We definitely have observed during some of the rulemaking that, the private sector piece of this, there's been a lot of pushback on this, and there's been attempts to really derail this even when it was in process. So there's money behind it.
So, I'll try to be quick, because I think we're coming to the end of this piece. The changes start in July next year, so a little over 12 months. Do you know what, like, for example, Santa Pac has the Recycle Plus program that's pretty recently rolled out. Box on a porch or out near your house that you can put things like number 5 plastic that may not be curbside recycled. There's some recent programs, I assume those get subsumed as this rolls out. Does the city have an education plan? Do the waste haulers have an education plan? How are we telling them? This group has an education and outreach committee, working group effectively. That might be helpful to connect there.
Yeah, we'll be leaning on any and all resources to get the word out. There's a lot of things that still have not been completely decided. And so there's elements of this that are premature to start rolling out from a public education standpoint. We anticipate that by February, April at the latest, there will be some resources the pros have set up. That's what we've asked for at any rate. So that we have a state website that we can point people to for information. And so we have some consistency in how we're talking to people across the state. And there's some alignment in, the communication and outreach and education around this. One thing to consider as well is that, the pro money does not start flowing until July 1st. So everything isn't going to start on the 1st. There's going to be, upgrades to facilities and depots that are developed and things like that happening between 2025 and 2027. So I think the ramp up is going to be a little bit slower than this July 1st date, but the unified state collection list will be implemented curbside at that point. So I think we'll start seeing that volume grow as the word gets out and as there's more capacity and the depots are developed and the facilities and, even the haulers will need to tool up, and until that money is actually available, I think it's very unlikely that a lot of these private businesses are going to make that investment with their own capital and hope for reimbursement, although that is allowed for. So I just don't anticipate a lot of it happening until the money's actually there.
So the curbside collection list changes as of July 1st, but they may not all be ready to handle that. kind of read between the lines
I
on
think
that
they'll be
sense.
ready to handle it, mostly just because I think the volume is going to
volume's gonna be
increase
like
over
first,
time.
sure.
You know, and then there's some contamination education pieces, I think that will also serve as like public education pieces, like, you know, labels for containers, like bowl cards and things like that, which I think for some people will be when they get the memo.
Okay, can I ask one more?
Yeah, sure.
Multifamily buildings, there are a lot of renters in Eugene, quite a few of whom, like U of O students, for example, may live in large multifamily buildings, and some multifamily buildings don't necessarily offer the same types of recycling services as you would get in a single family home. Is there, are there city requirements that overlap with this and make sure that multifamily?
All
buildings-
multifamily dwellings over a certain size, I believe it's a triplex or above, are required to provide the same recycling program access to their residents as single-family residents have access to. We definitely find ourselves educating landlords about that.
Just a little louder, what'd you say?
I said we find ourselves educating landlords about the fact that access to the recycling program as it stands now and as it will under the RMA is required for multifamily residences as well as single-family residences. So the program will be the same. And multifamily residents will have access to the same collection. It's just that it will be commingled in commercial containers
Right.
instead of at their home.
Anybody else? We don't have anyone. I was gonna ask, and it's kind of a combination of the last few questions that we've had, given the role of private business in all our systems and the changes. How confident are you that this is gonna happen this way? I mean, that it's actually going to begin? You feel pretty good about it?
Given that we're the first in the nation to do this, I think we're on the right track. And I think that our DEQ has done a phenomenal job laying this out and putting together a roadmap, doing the research and really, really being very, very thoughtful about how all of this is going to be implemented. But it's a new thing for the state and for the nation. So I would say, from what I've seen, I think it's going to be pleasant. And I think that success will be measured over again, time.
Anyone else?
I'm just really excited about being able to recycle. The Tetra Packs, come on, we used to recycle this. Come on, number 5, come on, number 5.
Well, and taps will be back and septic containers. Yeah, I think I'm really excited.
It's a great presentation,
Yeah.
very uplifting.
Well, thanks for letting me join you.
Thank you.
So why don't we just take 2 or 3 minutes while we get the next presentation set up? So if people want to grab snacks or grab a drink. Yeah, there's like maybe lemon bars and scones.
Like all we talk about. So they're not, but we don't, so. I can. Oh, good.
Oh, good.
Okay, so from beginning, it's actually nice to. And then you go back.
It's gonna be statewide, hopefully.
It's.
Get the word out to be consistent and to start to have some.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely. It's still wrong.
You get locked out, I'll let you back.
What is it?
Yeah, share.
That's funny how.
My cookie first.
Yeah.
I don't let it.
But like, we do it differently for planning commission, so.
You have a different, you're using the different system. And
I mean, we use.
it's right in the metro system.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we go.
Yeah, that's true. Too many fish, that's for sure. Oh, you're getting. I thought you were going to say hi. Like my priority.
The big good.
Kind of like when the dog comes over.
Yeah, right.
No, I just wanted a treat.
Dog. Okay, he didn't really mean. You were like.
That was not the correlation.
I'm just bored about what I want. It's a.
Our husky is, she literally talks differently to my wife, because Cheryl's kind of the pushover. She gets the most irritated, but she's also the easiest to get to give the dog what the dog wants. So it's pretty hilarious watching him. Because Kaya just totally manipulates her. Oh, she does. Yeah. She'll even put on her, poor mean face, put her ears up, and then
You do that very well. Yeah. Does it work for you too?
no, it's very frustrating. It's like, I see where I fit in this order.
So,
I'm ready to roll.
Yeah, dog number 1, daughters number 2, husband number 4, right?
Appreciate it.
Presentation about urban growth strategies. Please introduce yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Bowman. My name is Leah Roush. I'm with the city's planning division, community planning and design.
And I'm Rebecca Gershow. I also work with Leah in community planning and design and planner. And we're both part of an extensive team working on this project. So there's more of us behind the scenes, but we're gonna give you some background.
This is gonna be a very different presentation than Deborah's was, but hopefully we'll still keep your attention here. So urban growth strategies, it's the new kind of big full suite of project work that's coming out of the city's long range planning team. Some of you may have been involved in this similar work in the past under kind of the Envision Eugene moniker, but our next kind of swing at our citywide urban growth planning. So urban growth strategies, kind of the umbrella project that we'll talk to you a little bit about tonight. The intent is to identify all the tools, actions, policies, and land that we need for the next 20 years to support jobs and housing in Eugene. So this will build off many years of planning and engagement through Envision Eugene. And the project will evaluate our need for housing, jobs, parks, infrastructure, and schools, as well as what tools we have to help Eugene grow more efficiently. So the work will result in studies of what land is available in Eugene, updates to our Envision Eugene comprehensive plan and other adopted city plans and land use regulations, a parcel specific land use designation map, it's a mouthful, and an evaluation of whether we need to expand our urban growth boundary or our UGB. So we will talk about each of those components in a little bit more detail tonight. We wanted to tonight just give you some background on the project, talk through kind of the different phases that are coming up, and then Rebecca will talk through the kind of climate action related components and offer some upcoming engagement opportunities for you all and your networks, and then we'll save 15 minutes or so at the end for your questions. So at a high level, we've established 6 goals for the project. So they are to advance Eugene's vision for a community where people at all income levels can afford to live, work, shop, and play, facilitate the production of more housing and move Eugene towards more fair and equitable housing outcomes, support data-informed policy decisions about urban area growth, including when to expand the urban growth boundary, to provide meaningful opportunities for community members to inform how Eugene plans for growth, to center the voices and experiences of historically marginalized community members in decision-making, and of course, always to comply with relevant state statutes and administrative rules. And I'm sure you all have heard, there's a lot happening around housing at the state level, so incorporating new legislation as well. This kind of big suite of work advances many different city council priorities. So completing the Envision Eugene comprehensive plan has been a priority for several years since we completed the first chapters in 2017. Since then, the council approved the Housing Implementation Pipeline, or the HIP, which is a 5-year internal work plan to advance key housing priorities across city teams. So the HIP really looks at how we can advance more housing production kind of in line with our city goals. And it identifies several urban growth strategies, kind of project components as priorities. Urban growth strategies also include several projects to advance actions from the Climate Action Plan 2.0, specifically in that compact development section of actions. And finally, a lot of this work is supported by the newest city strategic plan. So it will advance several urgent community needs established by the city council goal for sustainable and accountable development. So we wanted to run through kind of the 3 phases to this work, and there's a few kind of components or pieces of work under each. The first phase is to identify and document our community's needs and priorities for housing. So the housing production strategy is one of the first pieces we're working on, and that will summarize and prioritize the tools and actions we need to address our local housing needs. After adoption in 2026, the housing production strategy will basically be an 8-year work plan adopted by the council to advance our housing priorities around choice and affordability. In the shorter term, we'll identify a handful of tools to adopt right away. These are called land use efficiency measures, and they're tools that use residential and employment lands more efficiently. So allowing or encouraging more housing or jobs on land than we would have previously expected under current conditions. One of the land use efficiency measures we know we'll be using is climate-friendly areas. So I think some of you have heard a little bit about climate-friendly areas as a part of the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules implementation. These are designated areas where people, they're intended to be places where people can meet their daily needs without relying on a car. So they're dense, they're mixed-use areas with good walking, biking, and transit connectivity, and a higher density of homes, jobs, and services. The second phase is really focused on understanding our land supply needs for different urban uses. So jobs, housing, parks, schools, and infrastructure. To understand our land needs, we need to look at both our supply and our demand. So this will be done through a series of technical analyses. I'm not going to talk about these in a lot of detail today, but at a high level, we're really trying to understand what is our current land capacity within our current urban growth boundary, and how much land do we need in order to meet our projected demand for the next 20 years. I'll hand it off to Rebecca to talk about that final phase of work. Okay.
So all of this housing and technical analysis work that Leah talked about will result in policy outcomes, which we will move forward primarily through the next phase of our comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan implements the vision that was outlined in our Envision Eugene strategy, and it'll be supported by new community input that I'll talk about in a couple of slides. So updates will include policies that are housed in 5 new chapters on housing, compact development and urban design, community health, and community engagement. The 5th chapter is the Eugene specific land use designation map, which Leah mentioned. This parcel specific map will clarify and define land use designations and policies for the land within our UGB. It'll make it easier and straightforward for processing development. Finally, other policy changes, you can see that last bullet down there, will very likely be necessary to implement these outcomes of our UGS work, including amendments to our code, the metro plan, and other refinement plans or local plans as needed. So all of these slides of work are all slated to be adopted by the end of 2026. So the climate action plan components. This work overlaps in many ways with the interests of the Sustainability Commission. As Leah described, we'll be asking council to designate our climate-friendly areas where people can meet their daily needs without relying on a car. In these mixed-use areas with excellent biking, walking, transit connectivity, that's the vision, and a higher density of homes, jobs, and services. So we're taking this concept that was introduced statewide, and we're broadening it locally into looking at additional policies around different scales of centers where the city can incentivize future compact development. So these policies will live in the comprehensive plan, primarily in the compact development and urban. The chapter on community health will also have policies related to a healthy, natural, and built environment, including things like environmental justice, green infrastructure, and access to services. We also have an opportunity to consider recommendations from the Efficient, Healthy, and Resilient Buildings Project, which could be another vehicle for implementation of climate resilient housing production strategies. So this next slide is our list of engagement activities from the Urban Growth Strategies Community Engagement. It outlines a wide range of activities from individual interviews to citywide events. The Eugene Planning Commission approved our engagement plan last month. And there was a 3-pager fact sheet that was sent out to you all, I believe, prior to the meeting. It's linked in that fact sheet if you're interested in looking at the engagement plan in more detail. And page 7 of the engagement plan has more information on all of these activities, but we're also happy to answer any questions. And so the next steps for engagement and how the Sustainability Commission can get involved specifically, we'd like to highlight. We have a citywide survey coming out in May and a citywide open house following in June. They'll both focus on housing needs and priorities and climate-friendly areas and center concepts and priorities. So we will continue to have these conversations in the fall with the public to discuss area-specific considerations for centers and potential climate-friendly areas. And we really encourage your participation in those activities. We would like your direct involvement as well as sharing these opportunities with your networks, because we're going to be working really hard to get out the information as broadly as possible. We would like to come back to the Sustainability Commission in early next year to discuss all of this work, the engagement results, share our process and where we are, and how it's being incorporated in a draft at that point into the comprehensive plan policies. We're going to be coordinating with Danielle, which we already are doing, and Ian, and we're going to make sure to share our project updates. We're sending out regular project updates to the Planning Commission, which we are interested in sharing more broadly than that, if you're interested, as well as upcoming engagement opportunities. And that's it. We are interested in hearing if you have any questions. That was a lot. That's a lot. We crammed it in really quickly. We thought we only had 15 minutes.
The emphasis with like the compact development, how does that look? Is it more, I guess, policy and code driven, or is there also possibly direct action? And then is there incentive to help developers do what we all recognize would be beneficial on all these situations, social, health, cycling, everything.
Yeah, I would say all of the above, because we're doing this whole suite of work together, we have the opportunity to look at financial incentives, policies that kind of direct this work and set the city's direction. And through the housing production strategy, actually set up kind of a work plan and an action plan to say that what those actions are can be really broad. It can be pursuing financial incentives on key transit corridors that encourage more development in transit located areas. It could be relooking at our land use code or specific zoning to encourage a higher density in certain parts of the city. It has kind of a full financial incentives across the city. So a full suite of tools we'll be looking at there and working with the development community to shape that plan and understand what would be most impactful towards getting more housing produced across the community, but also in a way that matches kind of our vision for compact development along key transit corridors and in core commercial areas.
Yeah, and I would just add that as a city, we don't build housing. And our planning is really focused on the land use levers that we can implement. And so it's that combination of like designating climate friendly areas and then looking at what incentives we can offer community members, builders, folks to develop in those areas in the way that we provide policies around.
May or may not be. Oh,
That's okay, go ahead. I just missed Dennis. I'll get you.
Dennis, go.
I'll just have, an observation and then, may morph into a question. I've represented the sustainability on ETAC, the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. So I've waded into the edges of the weeds of this. And two observations was one, some really good work doing there, getting that data collection. And the role of the advisory committee has been largely to advise staff to have reports that make sense to lay people. And I'm like the token layperson in that room. And I want to just really highlight, I was very glad to hear of centralizing marginalized voices, because at least at that level, the voices are predominantly a development community. It's real estate folks and developers and me and somebody from Beyond Toxics, who's one of the NGOs in town, who's doing the most work around diversity and listening to those voices. But that's not been the case there of what voices are heard at that level at least. And there's a designated slot in that group from our commission to assure that there is some attention paid to CAP 2.0 goals. And that was my piece is, where is that in this, update reports and stuff? I'm gonna have to step back from that because I have some job conflicts over the next few months, but that's when I just want to say, good work, and I hope you can find those voices to really participate in that process. And I understand that's been the challenge. But I also know NAACP has a housing committee that sometimes, as I understand it, hasn't quite understood where they might speak up. So just mostly a comment about that intention of centering the process that just shifts is good work. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I will just add, we got some funding from the state to specifically focus on kind of equitable community engagement. So we'll have some specific engagement tactics that are really focused on reaching folks who don't have a platform now or don't traditionally show up to kind of public forums, open houses, right? More like traditional engagement tactics. So we're excited about that. And because a lot of this work and a lot of the state's new requirements around this work are very, very housing focused. That is a very pressing and real life need that I think will get folks interested in engagement in a different way than this kind of more theoretical planning around long-range urban growth, so.
Right. Well, and I also just have to comment today. I mean, I looked at the graphs and there was sort of a delayed timeline on some of the collection of data around housing strategies. Well, there's changing baselines. And that's one of the ones that took me a little bit to grok in that room with ETAC was, I want to know, what's the impact of, ADU changes? Well, we don't know yet. What are the impact of middle housing changes? We don't know yet because it's a new baseline. And I know, really appreciate hearing more in that avenue, that staff is really trying to track that to make that future analysis possible. But also, I think all of us in the community need to recognize we don't know, and those of you who are collecting better data are not gonna know for a while. We're just not. The council doesn't get to know of what they did what they hoped it would do for a while. And in the meantime, people will steam about it.
Oh, yes, they will.
So, thank you, because that kind of segues a little bit into what I was gonna ask about, which is like a partnership with LTD, for example, like where do they fall in? Because,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's a bus driver shortage, which is canceling routes, and that map we've seen before in here, just is so fluid, like I don't feel like from year to year, you 100% know where LTD is gonna go and be. So how does that affect this designation of the centers in the climate friendly areas? I mean, if you can't get in and out of them,
Yeah,
or they change, like, oh, wait.
yeah. The relationship between land use and transportation generally, including transit, is a bit of like a chicken and egg, I think, of do you have to have the density of housing and services first and transit will follow because now there's enough people to justify a frequent route? Or can we not get that density of housing until there's a good transit line and people will want to live there, right? And it is a little bit of like this. So all that to say, LTD is a very important partner in this work in setting that like long range policy direction. They can tell us, there's operational challenges about getting frequent service to this part of town, right? Or how we coordinate across Eugene and Springfield on some of our routes that cross between the two towns on Franklin, for example. So yes, definitely an integral partner. I think for climate friendly areas in particular, it's been interesting. We did a study of where across the city could potentially be designated just based on existing zoning, based on existing transit access. And there were some interesting parts of the city excluded where we have a higher density of housing and commercial, but there's not frequent transit service there right now. And it doesn't mean we can't designate it as a climate friendly area because maybe that's the lever that needs to be pulled in order to get transit service there. And maybe there's also operational challenges to why it's not there yet. So yes, all of those things. And we want them to be at the table. And I think they want to be at the table to be a part of those conversations.
Yeah, and in addition, we coordinate really closely with our transportation planning program, who has an even closer relationship with LTD. So on many fronts of transportation. But it is a challenge because it is so in flux. And it does feel like it changes every year.
Because it does. You're not just feeling it. It really is.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to jump in. We got somebody else waiting. It seems like, especially in newer areas, if we're looking at areas to expand, that there's similar challenges with how you do the commercial and service development, because it seems like it's one thing to get a housing development, but if you want a real climate friendly area that has all the opportunities and the services, you need the other things too. And how do we incentivize that and ensure that that happens and we don't just have housing outposts?
Right. And we didn't even talk about that part. But assuming we are going to have a need to expand the UGB, we may or we may not. We think we probably may, but we could do enough efficiency measures, you know, incentivize enough compact development that we don't need to expand the UGB. It could be that even with all of those levers that council wants to implement, we still need to expand. Then we'll come back to the ETAC and we will share a lot of our expansion analysis. We just went through an urban reserves program where we have land designated in reserve in different areas around the urban growth boundary that isn't perfect for urbanization in any way, but it's deemed the most suitable for potential urbanization. So we'll be studying those areas, and that's exactly why we're not actually required right now to do the employment study that Leah talked about, but we thought we can't just look at residential, we have to look at jobs also because they're linked and we don't want it to get out of balance. So even if we are only expanding for residential neighborhoods, we will also be looking at nearby areas for commercial and where services are, where transportation corridors are, how close they are to existing services, future services, all of those pieces will be considered.
Anyone else? Questions, comments, Dennis?
Yeah, I just, you mentioned something about that there are some areas being considered for designation as climate friendly areas. Could you give a sense of what some of those are, just to give us some sort of examples of what they might look like now? I mean, I bought a Craigslist item in Orenco out of Hillsborough, which is this whole community that's developed around a train station, Orenco Station. There's this whole thing there, and that's, I think, the idealized version of what the legislature was looking at. But you mentioned there's some areas here that are being considered for designation. What would those be?
Yeah, so we did a study just to understand citywide where are the areas that check some of the boxes from the state legislation. So it's certainly, as staff, we haven't really done a policy level narrowing or anything like that. So it looked at our existing zoning where we already planned for higher densities of residential, commercial, or mixture of uses, where we have frequent transit service now, and overlaid, what are our walking and biking networks, and looked at a few other factors, but those were the big ones. So when we put those together, just from a pure mapping exercise, we have, of course, downtown and greater downtown than just the core. And then we have a lot of our kind of key corridors. So that would be West 11th, the 6th and 7th corridor, kind of just immediately west of downtown, Santa Clara Station, Lower Coburg, Walnut Station, so Franklin Boulevard area near the university, South Willamette, Highway 99. I'm missing a couple, but those are the big ones that are standing out in my brain right now. Santa Clara Station is basically that commercial area at Beltline and River Road. And one of the challenges, and a lot of that's based on transit service and our existing zoning. So a lot of those areas have kind of the same higher density commercial zoning right now, where residential development is allowed. But transit service tends to follow major and minor arterials, right? So those are on some big roads, some of which are not very comfortable to walk and bike around. So I think that's something we're gonna have to wrestle with in the designation process and in our engagement of, do we want to use this tool to make those areas more walking and biking friendly, which I think we do, and increase density along those corridors? And also, how do we acknowledge and recognize that right now a lot of them don't feel very climate friendly. And this is a long range planning process. So, right, we're trying to plan for 20 years into
Right.
the future.
No, I appreciate that. And as somebody who's lives relatively close to that Walnut piece, I know transportation's already getting lots of pushback on changing the feel of the boulevard.
Right.
From, lots of my neighbors who I don't agree with, but. So,
That's a perfect example of a lot of investment needed, but with investment could be a place that's a high density, walkable, mixed use, good transit service. But it's going to take a little time to get
right,
there.
and I mean, that's a unique sort of interface between campus and different kinds of residential that creates its own tension all by itself.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely. Lily is.
Okay. Lily.
So I'm Lily. I'm a member of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council, and at our last meeting, we were discussing actually about how there are higher rates of asthma among students in the Willamette High School region. So I think this is something that's like an environmental health concern that's related to urban growth, right? So you mentioned in the presentation that public health is one priority. So I'm curious to hear about more specific measures or initiatives under this project that are aimed at improving air quality or reducing environmental factors related to urban.
Yeah, that's a great question. We are currently working on the community health chapter. It's a bit of a catch-all, because community health affects so many things and so many things affect community health. And it's also not traditionally looked at as a land use, policies. So we're looking at things like policies around environmental justice, like co-locating industrial and residential uses, looking at mitigation strategies, environmental overlay zones, not really zones, because this, but environmental overlays. And there's a lot of broader public health issues, like you mentioned, that we have to think, okay, what is the land use tool that we can think about that would be appropriate in this plan? So I know that two of our colleagues are actually speaking with the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council tonight. So you're getting planning here, but they're also getting planning there. So we're hoping to come to you guys and talk to you a lot more about this plan, because you're an important voice, and it'll be good to talk about this more.
We're planning for you 20 years down the road.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, quick question. Discussing the zones, you're talking about out Franklin, and you think farther out Franklin, Glenwood, and it made me think, is there concurrent or complementary effort going on in Springfield at all that overlaps with this?
Yeah, Springfield is required under the same rules to do the climate friendly areas designation. So they're on a similar track in terms of identifying potential areas. And I believe they're set to designate and adopt. I don't want to speak out of turn. It's either the end of 2025 or the end of 2026. So close to the same timeline as us. And Glenwood is certainly one of the areas that they're looking at, in addition to downtown and a couple other areas. Or Main Street, I should say. In terms of the housing, they function under the same urban growth planning requirements that we do. So they're a little bit ahead of us on some pieces, like the land use designation map. They're a year or two behind us on some of the housing planning work, but they fall under more or less the same requirements that Eugene does.
Their timing may be a little bit different for the rest of the UGB related analysis.
Yeah, like the housing planning, they're, I think, 1 to 2 years behind us on the required timeline.
But the transit seems especially relevant.
Yeah.
That be linked.
Yeah, and that's still one of our regional planning efforts. We're pretty siloed, honestly, in terms of planning for each community. But we do have an affordable housing consolidated plan that's for Eugene Springfield, and transportation planning is still that region.
When you said you would like more involvement from the commission, or at some point, are you, you want to go over that a little bit more, what you'd like?
Sure. So we would like to, when we have our upcoming outreach activities in May and June, our survey, our open house, when we have our climate friendly area conversations, we would love your participation as residents, as sustainability commission members, and we would love for you to share information about those events and engagement activities with your networks. That would be super helpful. We're also interested in coming back. This is March, in like a little less than a year from now, when we have some draft policies and draft concepts to share with you and have a discussion and get your. That's what we're thinking right now.
Okay, so-
It could shift, but that's what we're thinking right now.
That's good. So, were you saying you wanted to put us on the list for your newsletter or something, so we would get reminders? So you're wanting us, when the survey comes out, go fill out the survey, tell your friends to go fill out the survey. So I think
Yeah.
if we got some reminders on that, that would be helpful. Come to the open house, tell your friends to come to the open house. Cool.
Thank you all so much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate it. Dennis can keep you updated from the chat perspective, because you're gonna be hearing more about it.
Yeah, out of that for the next couple of weeks. I'll be watching the videos and trying to help out the detectives. I was far less wonkish than most of those people in the room, but they did like the first 4 or 5 meetings going. That's what I said, I was the designated, if this makes sense to me, it makes sense to your average lay leader.
Okay, we slipped a few minutes behind on the schedule, because that got so interesting. So we've got committee updates right now. Do you have any committee updates? Thank you much.
Thank you.
Just one, on FYI, for folks that, I shared with Jan that, we surfaced and got a little press coverage, around the, demonstration. Students at the U of O had a rally when the board met. And the particular issue, one of the 2 issues on the table with the board was around the boilers that the commission had expressed an opinion on and shared some information with the council on. And I had shared with other people that we had done that. And Alexi's been involved with other people in the community. And they shared that with the Board of Trustees. So, you know, it was one of those interesting nuances of language, because we could have formed council, but it wasn't within our purview to make a recommendation. It kind of played out as though we did, which is not exactly what we did, but we were sort of indirectly in the room. And the other piece is the university's president reported at that point in time that they're still looking for input around that issue. The decision is not final yet. So I intend to do, you know, some personal comment as a former university mid-level administrator, et cetera. Just FYI.
Yeah, I thought that was neat too. It made it sound well, that we wrote a letter about it. It made it sound like we wrote a letter to the university or to whatever, when we actually wrote it to the council, but fine, that's okay.
Right.
And-
Well, that whole nuance of,
Right.
we are not
Right.
in those particular instances where it's engagement with another government entity, we make recommendations, and the council even has to be cautious of where their role is, because the university makes its own decisions.
That was interesting. On committees, I guess for the rest of the group, Laura Allen has stepped down as chair of the Education and Outreach Committee. Dennis has agreed to pick up that banner and charge ahead, and we're just in the process of getting our next meeting scheduled, so we're working on that. Thank you to you both. Updates from either of the other committees?
Mitra's not here.
It was not here. Okay.
Building decarb met and had a couple of guest speakers in a session talking about the split incentive. So cases where the resident, we're mostly talking about housing here, although it's present in commercial too. But cases where the resident or the tenant of the building pays the energy bills, but the landlord is responsible for capital costs, which means the person who buys equipment or makes investments in efficiency doesn't have the financial incentive to do that because they don't benefit from that energy efficiency because somebody else pays the bills. So we hosted a couple folks from outside Eugene, but in Oregon, one nonprofit person and one developer who have some experience looking at some models. Ian joined us, and Ian is probably well ahead of the building decarb group already. So I hope that there was something useful in that meeting, at least for you, Ian.
And this is a topic that has come up as we've had conversations as staff with businesses. Continues to be something that's surfaced on both sides of this conundrum that we're trying to solve.
Yep. Yeah, so there are some thoughts that came out of that. I still need to organize notes and share that back out. As well as some follow-up with the presenters who had some thoughts on potential either policy or programmatic levers that might be useful to do something about that split incentive challenge. It's a tough nut to crack. But it's a very relevant one when most of our residents are renters. So that's where that sits right now.
Yeah, I'll just add an observation from that, presentation that I was part of that was very thought-provoking. I mean, the reality is, if you lump utilities with rent, there's no incentive financially for renters to use less electricity, for example. And it's not beneficial, the developers are limited in how much they can raise rent, even if it includes utility, by rental controls, by limitations on how much you can increase the rent. Even if you roll in utilities, it's still considered a rent. So those are some of the policy things that didn't seem to match. That you can't take the rent up, even if it's actually the total cost to a renter may be going down because now utilities are included. And so some of those policy things can complicate what might be workable for a developer or owner if they could, recoup their investment by raising the rent a little bit at the same level that the utility costs are likely to go down for the resident. So interesting stuff to kind of go.
Thank you. So updates from council next.
Before we move on from committee,
Yeah.
I just wanna just do, we have about 3 more meetings before this fiscal year ends, so April, May, June. And so June is likely when the commission would approve anything that's gonna go to council that comes out of committees for this year. So I think it would be good to get any I think it'd be a good time to get some of these final committee meetings scheduled out as far as May, just to kind of make sure we can get through what we said we would do in the work plan. We just scheduled an education and outreach committee. As soon as we were able to schedule it was early April, and so schedules are filling up quickly. I think, the sooner these can get on calendars for everyone, just the more likely we'll be to accomplish the work plan.
So,
Thank you. Yeah.
our June meeting is what date?
Third Wednesday, I'm not sure what that is.
Danielle, I think education outreach, is like one more meeting and then it's, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I think she's wrapping it up. She had some,
Education and outreach, food waste.
No,
I'm sorry, food waste.
Yeah, you're right. I
I'm
want
sorry,
it to be
I
wrapping
meant to
up.
say food waste.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's wrapping up, so that should be not a problem. I know she would wanted to go over, I don't have the information that she has to stand in and do that tonight. Cause she has some like follow-up stuff that only she knows about that she was gonna talk about. But anyway, I'm pretty sure we're just about done.
Great.
So our June meeting is the 19th, so if any of the committees have things to bring to that meeting, they need to be done the week before that, right? So. Good
Yeah,
point.
and I think it's fine if the output is a little different than what was originally planned, that's fine. But just keep in mind, that timeline that's ahead of us still. Be good to get something out of each committee, by June.
Turns out to be such a tight, feels like.
I know.
Goes so fast. Okay, but that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing it up. Okay. Do you have some updates for us, Councilor Semple?
I do not have a lot, but Danielle and Ian came to council and gave a very thorough report on where CAP 2.0 is. And a phenomenal document, every single action in the CAP was listed and where we are. And I was so impressed with how many of them are going. They've been started and some of them will be ongoing forever. Some have an end date, some are completed, a few haven't been started. But I was really impressed with how much city's doing and that I was unaware of a lot of it. So it was really valuable. And yeah, we're not to where we need to be, but the things we're doing will be ongoing. We would hope that technology will improve, so do not despair, we're on the right track. And then council's on break, so, we're getting ourselves sustained. I will say that today, the dog park at WJ opened between 6th and 7th in Washington and Jefferson. And I went over there this afternoon. There's only one other person there and then another person came, so it was divine. But it's a really nice park. Of course, it's in good shape right now, but it's just really nice and it's big enough. I can throw the aerobie ring. So far, it's not going over the fence. And I think that it is a sustainable measure because now I do not drive to a dog park. I want to. So look at all the carbon I'm saving. Thank you.
Climate friendly areas, right?
More dog parks.
Okay.
It should be part of the 20-minute neighborhood. Serious, people are not stopping having dogs.
Updates from staff.
Yeah, I mean, we went to city council. I think I was really pleased. I think it went well. And then let's take this time to generate questions for next month's meeting. So next month we have eWeb coming. They're gonna be sort of our longer presentation. The plan for the prompt I've given them is what we included in the work plan, and it's basically to kind of share and explain what sort of opportunities they might be exploring into their, as they look to increase energy needs for our community, and what opportunities are there to fill that need with clean energy. There was initially, when this topic came up at the work planning retreat, the eWeb had recently released their exploration of nuclear, and there was some small modular nuclear, which is different than what nuclear kind of used to be, but, so that was sort of what the prompt was that I gave them. You know, things have changed since then, that project that they were considering on small modular nuclear is no longer a project that is gonna be viable for them to, like, close down, so that's not really something that's on the table for them anymore, at least from what I know, but, they'll be here to speak for themselves, and so I'd love to generate some questions, that have been really helpful for the presenters. So let's start with that one, and then we can go into the second one, which is me.
Okay.
You guys can word it better for me, but I'd be interested in moving forward. Where do they see their role helping with infrastructure? For example, charging stations, et cetera, because we talk a lot about the different communities that we want to make sure that we're serving. I feel like sometimes we're asking them to come to the table so we can hear their opinion, but then we don't provide them the facility that they need to be a part of the community. Is that fair?
Sure. So are you specifically talking about, vehicle
Right,
charging
EVs.
infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, yeah, that'd be the easiest thing that would be, to me, somewhat self-evident that that's not gonna work if we don't have the infrastructure. And seeing as how they would be the one bringing us energy.
And maybe data on how many of their like EV incentives that are actually being used, like taken advantage of. And whatever data they have around those incentives.
Again, specifically for EVs, kind of, or?
Yeah, I mean, since we're the Sustainability Commission, I don't wanna like dig into other things I'm interested in. but then-
A lot of incentives for.
Yeah, their
energy
heat pump
efficiency, building.
incentives, their solar incentives, or.
Yeah, that's, I
Yeah.
was gonna ask about solar and geothermal. So what are they doing to help support any kind of solar development, whether it's rooftop or community solar or,
That's the one I specifically wanted to ask is community
you
solar.
know, commercial, any of, and what, I mean, the clean, if they were trying to move, they're trying to increase clean energy, they're to get to eventually 100% clean energy. How are we gonna do that? But okay, if the small nuclear isn't working, I'm not sad about that. But, you know, what about geothermal? What are they doing in any way actively to either make it easier for people to go to rooftop solar or to, you know, create some projects, or are they looking into geothermal, any of those kinds of sources?
You made me think. of
And I have questions about, you know, potentially incentives for, you know, battery storage, and what are they looking at in terms of battery storage, what can reduce peak demand levels? Because they had talked about it earlier in their plan about enhanced storage, battery and or alternative storage, because there was a thing in the New York Times today about.
They have something on the website about battery storage, and the incentives, but they're so expensive. I mean, it's really,
I know, I'm about to buy
Are
a
you?
10 kilowatt battery system.
So that's, are you interested in storage like a power wall or something like that? That's like within a home or
No,
storage?
well, both and,
Functionality
what are the
perspective?
incentives they offer to individuals and what are they looking at? Because my understanding in sitting in with an earlier planning meeting, they were looking at that. And so I'm
Large
looking
scale
at
storage.
larger
Yep.
scale storage as well as incentivizing that to reduce peak demand. And even, I mean, if some of that is even the level can, you know, their incentives will mostly cover, you know, phase 2 chargers for an individual, but, you know, is there extra incentive if people, I forget what it's called, the bimodal charging, where one could charge their car and then their car goes back into the system, creates a backup, so.
Specifically, kind of related to that, I've heard that some of the things that currently, the way things work now is that metering is not set up to encourage people to do solar, and the whole net metering.
Solar reimbursement rates, net
Yeah.
metering.
And the size of the meters that you have to have you know, a meter for every 25 kilowatts or something, instead of making that, you know, a larger volume. So those kinds of things, and are they considering adjusting that stuff to be more encouraging?
Is that true? This is kind of for you, just if you are putting in like your personal like power wall type of situation, don't they have a restriction like you absolutely cannot give back? Like they even, what I've read from their website, like they're not allowing any sort of return to the
No,
system. Right.
I can't sell my battery.
Well, no, I mean,
Yeah.
right, you can't, you have to be sure that you have, that it can, under no terms will it put electricity back into the system.
Right.
Right,
It's a
and
safety thing.
for sure,
No,
but,
it's a
so
bad.
that's a good question of like, right, and that was, I would like that as well.
Right.
But like, that's a good question, it's like, are there, was that what you were getting at, are there plans for that, like by which, the bimodal, or where you could,
Probably part of the
Bi-directional.
storage question, where
Yeah.
like you could have like a big battery that's like football field full of batteries. You could have a virtual power plant, which would be hooking up a bunch of people who have power walls. You know, some utilities on the East Coast do that. So that I think we'll talk to them. I think that's
Right,
that's a part of
community
the
cell,
storage.
solar and community batteries, so,
right, okay.
I think it's part of the storage question. So we'll make sure that
right.
That's
The
a
other
good enough.
related question is, where are they and their thoughts about variable rates? Higher rates for peak demand times kind of stuff, which is where if they go there, my battery will begin to pay for itself more readily, so.
So far, they have a piece on their webpage about peak demand, but the rates are all flat. They may be,
Right.
when you procures power, it's not flat pricing, so.
No.
ETO, Energy Trust of Oregon, runs a community solar program for people served by investor-owned electric utilities. But UWEB doesn't. So I would be interested in asking if they are looking at offering a community solar program in Eugene, and if that's the model, or if they're thinking about something different.
I also got another question that I'm not real versed on, but does the EWEB have the capacity, I think it's computer capacity to interface with grid enhanced technology? Which is maybe Alexi or Ian, you guys know this, which is important for accommodating increased capacity and also helping with increasing safety in fire season. Grid enhanced technology.
Maybe that's like demand response.
I think it is.
is that like a smart hot water heater that can respond to a signal, so it's not gonna be demanding when you are at a hot.
Water heaters, stuff like that.
Okay.
Potentially.
And you have like an article that talks about that you can forward me, or is that?
I'll look
you got
for
that
it,
term?
yeah.
Okay, you can send that to me, that I
Yeah.
can we'll dig into that, okay.
Great.
One more thing that may or may not be appropriate, and you guys can let me know. I always go back to this, like, what's the big picture questions about the incentivizing, like, people, so people who have money are the people that buy the batteries and the people that buy the EVs. I mean, I touch on this on a lot of topics.
And the reach eligible electric
Right.
lead loads.
Right, exactly. So I'm always sort of like, okay, so how do we encourage, again, the people with the larger homes that are leaking more, that are not as energy efficient? Like, how does EWEB want to incentivize those people who can afford to buy all the things that help the environment to do that? Like, how do you, obviously there's an equity issue with financials, but how do you get the people that have the money to spend the money? To make their, to keep their leaky house, which is like we saw in the grass, like one of the biggest emitters, right? To do it, just not out of the goodness of their hearts. How do we get all these people who can afford it on board? In addition to people that can't afford it, who might be renters anyway, and then it doesn't matter. Because we need to have, well, at any rate, but.
Lily has got her hand up. Hi, Lily, go ahead.
Hi, I'm not sure if this is relevant enough, but because I know that eWeb is replacing the College Hill Reservoir since it doesn't meet seismic standards. I would wonder what measures does UWeb take and what measures is UWeb taking to ensure energy reliability and grid resilience in the face of these extreme weather events that are related to climate change.
Thank you. So process check here, I guess we're
Yeah.
supposed to be adjourning now.
We need to
Shall we
Extend like
add about 5-10 minutes?
10 minutes just.
10 minutes to be safe.
Yes,
Okay,
10 minutes.
all in favor? Everybody okay with that? All right, let's move on. Go ahead.
Can I add one more thing on UWeb?
Yeah.
There's increasing movement toward, at least in some quarters, existing home building electrification. There's a ton of rebates for heat pumps for some folks, at least through the IRA. But not everybody's panel has enough amperage in it to do that. And sometimes electric service doesn't have enough amperage in it to do that. And so I expect that UWeb may be seeing more requests to upgrade service driven by people adding EV chargers or going to heat pumps or stuff like that. And so I'd be interested in hearing what their planning is around the distribution grid impacts of building electrification.
There's probably enough questions, huh?
I mean,
It's gonna be a 3-hour presentation.
yeah, we'll work on synthesizing this. I mean, I think it can kind of be simple and like,
I think there are themes that we've heard.
yeah, and
Like some themes for
it's
them.
terms we've heard through a lot of the engagement we've just done too, so. There are a lot of questions I have too.
Biology test and it's multiple choice, A through J.
They don't all have to be in there, but there's plenty of fodder for you.
Yeah.
We trust you.
And I mean, potentially, I think also viewing these presentations as like, they don't need to be fully, address every detail, but just a light, like a 10,000-foot overview that could then allow the commission to, see if there's an area that they would want to explore further, so in future fiscal years.
And honestly, I think a lot of it is sharing what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that people are aware.
Yeah.
Anything else under this item? Because then we have updates from commissioners.
Oh, real quick, well, so the other update, well, this is more, the other presentation that is happening next week, I included CAP 2.0 progress. This was gonna be a shorter one. And we just went to city council, provided an update on CAP 2.0. Sounds like a few folks watched it. So this could be similar to that. I'm curious if there's like follow-up questions, if you watched our presentation that you'd like me to dive in deeper, or it could also be more of a group discussion if everyone does watch that and gets up to speed about like, how can the commission help us communicate this progress that has occurred, or what ideas are there from the commission for staff for other ways that we could communicate this progress? Like, it could be more of a collaborative discussion if there's interest. Or it could just be like the same presentation I just gave to city council. So let me know what you would prefer.
Would it be presumptive to ask the commission to watch the presentation as homework?
No, it's a great presentation.
I think, and then that prepares us all for a discussion, which I think might be a better use of our time and yours. I mean,
Yeah.
quite truly, I mean, since it
agree.
is already out there, it's pretty.
Well, and I have a couple
What's
ideas.
the date again, just so I kind
It
of.
was the 11th.
11?
You could
I can
resend the link.
resend it.
Yeah.
I'll resend it. And
Thank you.
I mean, what we could do too is like, what we didn't necessarily do at the council presentation was go into a little bit more depth about the tools that we are currently using to communicate this progress. Like, there's some things on our website, we have the implementation plan. We're working on a annual report that's gonna come out hopefully in the next month or two. And so it's a good time for us to get more ideas about what else could help amplify this message that we are making progress on our climate action plan. And not that, even if it's sort of a pie in the sky list, now's a good time to give that to us. Not that we can do all of it, but we are sort of in this process of like re-envisioning what our communications look like with it, so.
Is everybody down with that? We're gonna say by next time, everybody's gonna review that presentation. We can keep that, you know, that introductory part of that to a minimum and jump into this other. Or does that sound good?
There's a 4-page agenda item summary that's also gives a little bit more detail as well. That kind
The whole
of is a
matrix.
complement to the presentation, yeah.
The matrix is longer than that,
The
right?
appendix is 25, well, just the
Yeah, so-
implementation is 25.
Counselor Semple's punishing you by making you read the AIS. We just have a summary that is kind of a very high level that complements our presentation. That's very, you know, and if you wanted to indulge and go through.
Even just to scan through it.
I was
it's
gonna
a
say,
base.
we've been asking for that for, you know,
Yes.
for the last year, so I think it's incumbent upon us to take the time
And a
to
lot of work
review
went
it.
into it. I mean, that took like 3 or 4 months to gather all those stories from across the organization and the community, and so
But it's-
it would be good.
It's a really helpful exercise, and we even heard from staff who have said, going through this kind of helped us recognize kind of their contribution towards the CAP and what they've done. They realized how much they had done in service of their programs, but also in service of the CAP. So I think it's been all around a really helpful exercise for the city.
It would be helpful to me in the discussion for you guys to come, and you may have touched on some of this in your presentation. I'll go back and look at it again, but you know, where do you think, I think the summary was, you know, we're actually making some progress, there's play, but more, not just we're doing better than we may have thought, but where would be the best places to be really focusing attention? You know, where are the places that we can make the most difference?
For the commission specifically.
Well,
Or
for the city
the-
and the commission, but maybe both. Now that we're into it, what looks like the areas I don't know.
Yeah, it may help us, you know, shape our next work plan of areas we can provide additional information and support around
That'd be
kinds
great.
of things.
Yeah.
You know, so we're not coming up with the areas
Yeah.
we're hearing from you folks too. But a citizen perspective would be helpful.
So when you send that out to the commission, will you make a little note that it, as discussed, like, 'cause since so many people aren't here, just sort of
Yep.
like, please watch this before the
Yeah.
next.
All
meeting,
those there
blah, blah.
voted in favor of everybody. should read it.
It may or may not be a quiz.
You only get a,
How about
only
we-
get a cookie if you watch the video.
Right.
Right, it's meant to fun.
Yeah.
Is that good for now?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think that would be a more helpful, for us too, rather than just regurgitating what we just did.
Okay, I would just like to touch on a couple things on this updates from commissioners, and I don't know if the rest of you have more. We have been making some progress on our meetings between counselors and commissioners, which is excellent. Alexi and I met with Lindsay Leach this week, and she was very receptive, and it was a really good meeting. I don't know if you have anything you want to say specifically about that, but.
It's a great meeting. She's interested in thoughts on policy proposals that come out of this council, and she's willing to be a sounding board before things go all through the whole process too.
Yeah, she wants to meet on a regular basis, at least for the next few months. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I know Aaron is working on setting up a meeting with Alan Zelenka. I tried to get a meeting with all of us, and I did not hear back from Counselor Zelenka, but he and Aaron are apparently in touch, so I say, let them get that going, and then we'll see.
I'll try to touch base with Aaron and see if
Okay.
I can get in on it.
Yeah, because I remember you wanted that, and I've reached out to Jennifer Ye, and I've not heard back anything. So, yes,
Hello. Yes.
Lily,
I've also reached out twice and I have not heard back anything.
good job, thank you.
Well, we'll keep working on it. But anyway, that's progress, so I'm pleased with that. We have a request, so next, on our next meeting, or actually, no, in May, not in April, in May. Beyond Toxics is coming to talk with us on one of the items about their Bethel Clean Energy Project. And they have also made a request to talk with us about artificial turf use in the city. And they've brought this up before in a couple of different ways. It's not on our work program, but it is the topic of some interest. And since they're already coming to us, I'm inclined to say, sure, go ahead and take another 10 minutes, we can make the agenda work right and you can address us on that. But I wanted to check with people if you were interested and willing to have that be on the agenda as well. No objections? No objections? Okay. All right, great. Thank you very much. I think that's all that I have. Anybody else have updates from commissioners? Or anything else for the good of the order? Anything else?
One quick note, really briefly, when we wrote our work plan, we did not put, leaf blower stuff in it, but now Portland has put a new policy together about phasing out gas leaf blowers. And I'm wondering if there's any groundwork that we might be interested in doing so that Eugene could explore maybe a year behind Portland to see, is this working? Is this a good idea? And be able to implement something similar as not the leader, but the second or third follower there. Not in our work plan, but now there's an example.
Yeah, given where we are in our cycle and we're needing to finish up things in the next few months, do you think there's something we could or should do now, or do you think it just makes sense to wait until we do our work planning next fall?
I'm asking the question.
Yeah, okay.
Good question.
To add back leaf blowers?
The question was, now that Portland has a policy on leaf blowers, gas leaf blowers, whether there's any groundwork that this group should be doing if, in case Eugene is interested in following that. It's phased in,
yeah,
it's way away, and we have our work plan done, so no is fine. I'm just asking the question.
I think for this work plan year, I mean, we've got pretty much the presentations are pretty full through the end, and committee work, it feels like we're pretty at capacity with the committees we have going. I think we should revisit that in the fall.
That might be the perfect timing.
Yeah, by
If
then there
it's
might be
been
some more
Poked
information.
around a little bit, maybe by then as well, to your point.
Yep.
And we have some data.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's gonna be phased in, it won't be phased in.
I guess the other option is you could, if someone just wants to write like a memo, you know, that's the other avenue through the work plan, working agreements. I think that the commission can make some, you know, raise council's awareness about something that doesn't need to go through a full committee, but I think someone would need to be the champion for that.
I just think the process for standing up a new committee is, there's some time involved in that, given
yeah.
kind of where the code is and kind of what we've been directed to do from city manager's office on setting up new committees outside of the normal approval chain in front of council.
So then, yeah, we have coming up, so we need to get on our June projected, I guess, the final reports from committees. We need to be on that agenda, right?
Yep.
And we're a couple months away, but by June, we'll want to have elected new leadership and all that.
I know, all of a sudden things are happening. It's always.
Yeah, and I have let Devin know that I will be away for the May meeting, so. Okay, alrighty, thanks, everybody. Good one.
Thank you.
Have a good equinox.
Everybody.
Oh, yeah.